I still remember the first time I met his family. It was supposed to be one of those perfect, cinematic days, sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse. Flowers everywhere, the faint smell of fresh pastries and champagne in the air. My fiancé, David, looked at me with that nervous, excited smile that made my stomach flutter. I thought, this is it. This is the moment where I officially join his world. But I had no idea that the world I was stepping into was nothing like I had imagined. His parents were something else. His father, Robert, tall, imposing, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. He smiled once, an almost predatory kind of smile, and then returned to studying me like I was some piece of art he couldn't quite understand. His mother, Clarissa, was polished, perfect in every detail. Hair flawless, jewelry sparkling, and a voice so sweet and sharp at the same time it could cut glass. And then there was the subtle message that hit me before any words were even spoken. I didn't belong here. It wasn't personal, or maybe it was. I wasn't from their world of old money, of private schools, corporate power plays, and carefully curated social circles. My parents had worked hard, yes, but we were ordinary, comfortable, nothing flashy, nothing worthy of their approval. And that distinction was clear the moment they smiled at me, and I could almost feel the judgment in the way their eyes lingered. David, bless him, tried to smooth things over. Dad, this is her, my fiancée. She's amazing. Clarissa's smile widened, just a touch too tight. Of course, dear. We've heard so much about you. The words were polite, but the tone. It was a trap. Compliments dressed up as challenges. I smiled back. Perfectly calm, collected. I'm not here to fight. Not yet. Over the next hour I watched, observed their family dynamics, the subtle power plays, the ways they tested David without him even noticing. And then, the prenup arrived. It was subtle at first. A folder handed to me casually, as if it were no big deal. We just want to make sure everything is clear, Robert said. Standard procedure. I opened it. My hands didn't shake, even though I felt my blood run cold. Every word was like a punch. Leave with nothing, that's what the document made clear. If anything went wrong, if I ever dared to step out of line, I would walk away with absolutely nothing. The room went quiet. I looked at David. His face was pale. He stammered, I thought we could talk about this later. Clarissa leaned in, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. No, dear. Now is best. It's only fair. You'll understand when you're part of this family. I closed the folder, smiled, calm. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stayed quiet, because in that moment, I realized something important. If I reacted the way they expected, fear, desperation, tears, they would have won before I even got started. I kept my calm. My silence became my shield, and deep down, a seed of resolve was planted. You think you're in control. That's cute. Just wait. That night, as I lay in my own apartment, replaying every smile, every glance, every condescending remark, I made a quiet promise to myself. I won't be trapped. I won't be dismissed. And someday, they'll regret underestimating me. The engagement was supposed to be perfect. Instead, it became my battlefield, and I had already decided I wasn't going to fight the way they expected. I was going to win on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across my apartment, but my mind wasn't on the warmth or the quiet, it was on that prenup. Leave with nothing. Those words echoed in my head like a taunt, and yet, somewhere deep down, they sparked a quiet fire. David called, obviously nervous. I don't know how to handle this, he admitted. My parents. They can be intense. I smiled softly, even though I was miles away from the reassurance he needed. Let them be intense, I said. We'll figure it out. Calmly, because I knew, the moment I opened that folder, that this wasn't about fairness or protection, it was about control. They wanted me to react. They wanted to scare me. And most importantly, they wanted me to give them something I didn't even know I had yet. Feuds, or I didn't give them anything. Over the next few days, I watched their patterns, carefully, quietly. The subtle ways they tested me. How Robert would make casual remarks about my lack of experience in high finance or my simpler upbringing. How Clarissa would casually ask questions about my family's income, my wardrobe choices, my taste in furniture, as if to catalogue my supposed shortcomings. I could have been offended. I could have argued. I could have cried. But instead, I listened, observed, learned. I noticed the little cracks. The way Robert overcompensated with arrogance when he didn't understand something. The way Clarissa panicked whenever a detail of the family finances came up. The way they both underestimated David, how often he was too polite to call out their condescension. And I started thinking, if they were trying to intimidate me, then their confidence was only a facade. Their empire wasn't untouchable. There were weaknesses hidden under that perfection. And I was about to find them one evening. During a family dinner, meant to impress me further or intimidate me further, they casually brought up the prenup again. I could see it in their eyes. They expected tears, shock, a fight, maybe even a rejection. But I didn't flinch. I understand your concern, I said, voice steady. And I'll review it, nothing more. No pleading, no anger, no submission. Just a calm acknowledgement that I had heard them. David's mother raised an eyebrow. Of course. It's just, we like to be thorough. Yes, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Thorough is good. I appreciate clarity. I left it at that. No reaction, no emotion, no game. Silence became my shield, and patience became my weapon. That night, I sat down at my desk, reviewing the folder I had taken home. Every clause, every stipulation, every word. I wasn't just reading a document, I was reading their strategy. Every word told me how they thought, how they expected others to behave, and most importantly, how I could outmaneuver them. And then a thought struck me. If I play their game their way, I lose. If I stay silent and watch, I might just win. That became my plan. Not confrontation, not tears, not begging. Just quiet observation, patience, and waiting for the perfect moment. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's the kind that arrives like a storm they never saw coming. And I was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, I realized that being engaged to David wasn't just about love. It was like stepping into a chess game I hadn't agreed to play, but one I was determined to master. Every family dinner, every gathering, every casual comment was a test. And the more I watched, the more I understood just how high the stakes were. It started small. At brunch one Sunday, Clarissa casually asked, "So, you're a career woman, I hear. But have you ever managed real wealth?" The words were coated in honey, but the sting was clear. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to stumble. I didn't. I have, I said simply, keeping my tone neutral, almost disarmingly calm. And I enjoy it. Her smile faltered, just slightly. Victory. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I was learning, observing, taking note. Then there was David's father, Robert. He loved to casually mention investments and boardroom decisions, expecting me to nod politely and appear impressed. One evening, he dropped a comment about a recent acquisition that had gone wrong, speaking as though he was testing my knowledge. I listened carefully. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I asked a few pointed questions, subtly highlighting the risks they hadn't considered. He blinked, almost offended. But I smiled. That was my first small win, not because I had argued, but because I had stayed calm, confident, and informed. I began to see the patterns. Their confidence, their arrogance, even their condescension. It was all a performance. They were trying to control me, to intimidate me, to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't the kind of woman who crumbled under pressure, and quietly, I began my own research. At first, it was casual. A question here, a conversation there. David noticed my curiosity, but he thought I was just interested in understanding the family better. Little did he know, I was digging deeper, reviewing business filings, reading news reports, and quietly noting the financial cracks they thought were hidden. It was fascinating. Really. The more I learned, the more I realized their wealth wasn't untouchable. There were vulnerabilities, oversights, opportunities that no one expected me to notice. And the thought made me smile quietly to myself. Every interaction became a subtle test of their own. I stayed polite, calm, and composed. Let them think I was intimidated. Let them think their prenup had me cornered. I was collecting pieces of the puzzle while they performed their little power plays, completely unaware that their own arrogance was feeding my strategy. One evening, after another tense dinner, I sat alone and reflected on what I had learned. This wasn't just about a document. It wasn't just about a family who thought they could control me. This was about understanding the rules of their world and then bending them quietly without anyone realizing it. I made another silent promise that night. I won't be trapped by fear or expectation. I won't be outplayed. And someday, all of this, every slight, every smug remark will work in my favor. The first test wasn't about confrontation. It was about patience, about learning, about staying calm while everyone around me assumed they had already won. And the best part? They had no idea what was coming. By the time the fourth week of engagement rolled around, I realized something crucial. Knowing their weaknesses was one thing, but exploiting them required patience, precision, and complete discretion. One misstep, one moment of anger, and the entire plan could collapse. So I stayed quiet. I smiled. I observed. And I moved like a shadow, unnoticed, but always present. It started with small things. A question about the family business here, a casual remark about investments there. David's father would launch into explanations, assuming I was naive. And in those explanations, he revealed more than he intended. Offhand comments about hidden holdings, minor disputes, and financial arrangements that weren't public knowledge. I filed every word away in my mind. One evening, while David and I were walking home, he casually mentioned a corporate restructuring his father was handling. They're reorganizing some subsidiaries, he said, unaware of the significance. I listened carefully, then asked a few subtle, pointed questions, as if I was simply curious. The answers I received were gold. A minor subsidiary, overlooked, almost forgotten, held far more value than anyone realized. And the more I dug, the more I discovered other small assets, mismanaged accounts, and investments that weren't as secure as the family liked to believe. I began keeping discreet records. Every conversation, every casual remark, every financial slip. No one suspected me. To them, I was the sweet, polite fiancé, taking notes like any engaged woman might about wedding plans or family traditions. But in reality, I was mapping out a blueprint, one that would eventually give me control. Without confrontation. Without anyone realizing it until it was too late. The prenup still sat on the table at home, unopened most days. I didn't need to sign it, not yet. They believed it was a threat, a weapon over me. But in truth, it was a self-imposed cage for them. The more arrogant they grew, the more careless they became, and the more opportunities I saw. And then came the first real test of patience. Clarissa, ever the social strategist, invited me to a weekend retreat, a so-called bonding trip with the family. A chance to see the real me, she said, with a hint of threat under the polite phrasing. I agreed, of course. Politeness, after all, was my mask. My silence would carry me through. During the retreat, I noticed subtle cracks. Conversations meant to intimidate me only revealed their lack of foresight. Robert complained about a board member who was slipping under the radar. Clarissa fretted about an investment David isn't involved enough to notice. Every word was a breadcrumb, and I followed them all. By the time the weekend ended, I had a mental map of vulnerabilities, financial, legal and personal. They thought they were testing me, but I was quietly testing them. And I was winning. That night, back in my own apartment, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I hadn't moved yet. I hadn't confronted. I hadn't even hinted at what I knew. But the plan was forming, and when the time came, it would be precise, devastating, and silent just like me. Because I had learned something important over the past month. Patience is power, and silence is the deadliest weapon in a family like theirs, and I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. By the 5th week, it became clear David's family was growing impatient. Their subtle tests were evolving into outright pressure. Every interaction now carried an unspoken expectation that I would break, that I would beg, that I would sign away my future without a fight. Clarissa's tone grew sharper, her smiles a little tighter. You know, we just want what's best for David, she said one evening, over a lavish dinner. Of course, that includes making sure his future is protected. We wouldn't want you to make mistakes. The word dripped with condescension, like a warning disguised as advice. But I didn't respond emotionally. I merely sipped my wine, nodding politely, my face calm. Inside, I was already calculating my next move. Robert joined in, a little more aggressively than before. Some people think love is enough, he said, eyes narrowing. But it isn't. Not in our world. Not in ours. I smiled softly, almost imperceptibly. Let them think their threats worked. Let them feel in control. My silence was a shield, my composure a weapon, and then came the gifts. Expensive jewelry, designer bags, and subtle reminders of their wealth. They weren't generosity, they were traps. We know it's a lot, but it's customary, Clarissa explained, eyes glinting with expectation. We wouldn't want you to feel unprepared for life in our family. I accepted the gifts with grace, storing them away, while my mind focused elsewhere. Every display of wealth, every pointed comment, every veiled threat, they all fit my strategy. They were revealing themselves in ways that would later work to my advantage. I began quietly reaching out to people in the family's circle under the guise of friendly curiosity. Lawyers, accountants, even casual acquaintances who knew about small investments. Every conversation was innocent questions about David's father's business philosophy. Clarissa's charitable contributions, but every answer was another piece of the puzzle, and I wasn't just watching their finances. I was learning their personalities, their weaknesses, their habits. Where Robert was impatient, where Clarissa was controlling, where David was distracted. Every detail mattered. Every small crack would eventually become my leverage. The tension escalated when David started to notice my calm. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked one night, worry in his voice. "They're trying to pressure you." "I'm fine," I said simply. "Really? Patience is power," he nodded, still uncertain. He didn't understand yet that my silence wasn't weakness, it was a calculated strategy. I wasn't here to beg for love or approval. I was here to ensure my future, on my terms, and deep down, I relished the irony. The family that had tried to intimidate me, that had thought they could manipulate me, was slowly playing into my hands. The more they pushed, the more reckless they became, and the closer I came to my ultimate goal, because in every pressure-filled moment, I reminded myself of the truth. Their control only existed if I allowed it. And I wasn't about to allow it. So I stayed quiet. I stayed composed. I observed. And I planned. The family pressure was increasing, and unknowingly, it was setting the stage for their own shock. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when I realized just how much power I quietly held. David had gone to a meeting with his father, leaving me alone in the penthouse. The sound of rain tapping against the windows matched the rhythm of my thoughts. I opened my notebook, the one I had been keeping meticulously, and reviewed every piece of information I had collected over the past weeks. Subsidiaries they thought were minor, investments they assumed were secure, hidden accounts, legal loopholes, and even subtle family disputes that had been carefully hushed. Each one of these small cracks was now a potential lever. And suddenly, the picture became clear. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to beg. I didn't even need to sign the prenup. I just needed the right move at the right time. That evening, I invited David to dinner at my apartment. The city lights reflected off the glass walls, casting a warm glow. I needed him calm, unaware, and confident. "I've been thinking," I said casually, as if discussing nothing of consequence. "About our future. About all of this." I gestured vaguely toward the engagement, the family, the prenup. David looked at me, concerned. "You're worried about them again?" I shook my head gently. "No, not worried. Observant. Patient. That's different." And in that moment, I saw something shift in his eyes. Curiosity. A little admiration. He didn't yet know how much I had uncovered. Over the next few days, I refined my strategy. I consulted discreet sources, quietly verified financial claims, and mapped out the perfect plan. I discovered a subsidiary the family had assumed worthless. In reality, it was a goldmine, a company generating millions in untapped revenue, with no public record that would draw attention. And the best part? They hadn't included it in the prenup. This wasn't luck. It was observation, discipline, patience, and suddenly, the game changed. I had leverage they never even considered. I kept my discovery to myself, of course. I didn't gloat. I didn't hint. I didn't even share it with David. Not yet. This wasn't about proving a point, it was about creating a moment they would never forget. Then came the perfect opportunity. Robert and Clarissa were hosting another gala, an event where they intended to show off their wealth, their influence, and subtly remind me of my place. I attended. As always, calm, composed, smiling politely, while quietly analyzing every interaction. That night, I realized something else. The family's confidence, their arrogance, and their relentless pressure had blinded them. They thought their wealth and status made them untouchable. They didn't see me. They didn't see the quiet storm growing in their midst, and I knew, in that moment, that the time to act would come soon, because patience had finally yielded results. I had the leverage. I had the map. I had the power to turn their control into their undoing. The prenup had been their weapon. But my silence, my observation, and my strategy had turned it into their weakness, and they were completely unaware. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Every step, every detail, had been planned meticulously over weeks of careful observation. I wasn't going in blind. I had leverage they didn't even know existed, and I intended to use it quietly, elegantly, without a single word of confrontation. David noticed my unusual calm that evening. "You're different tonight," he said, raising an eyebrow. "More confident? Is everything okay?" I smiled softly. "Better than okay," I said. Patiently waiting works wonders. The event was everything they loved: glamorous, luxurious, and designed to display their wealth and influence. Guests arrived in designer gowns and tuxedos, cameras flashing, champagne flowing. To everyone else, it was a perfect evening. To me, it was a stage, and I was the only one who knew the script. Clarissa approached, her usual polished smile in place. "Darling, we hope you're enjoying yourself. We want you to feel part of the family," she said. The underlying warning in her tone was unmistakable. "Remember your place." I simply nodded, letting her underestimate me as always. Robert joined in, subtly pressing about my future role in the family business. I listened carefully, replying only as necessary, my calm demeanor disarming him. Every word, every glance, every nod. My silence was a performance, a distraction, a cloak hiding my next move. Later that evening, I excused myself and quietly reviewed my notes one last time. The subsidiary, the hidden assets, the overlooked investments, they were all in place. My plan was simple: wait for the right moment, reveal the truth, and let the family's own arrogance do the rest. And that moment came sooner than I expected. During a seemingly casual conversation with Robert about a minor investment, I casually mentioned an analysis I had done completely offhand, as if it were just curiosity. "I was looking at the company's financials," I said, flipping through my notes. "It's interesting how much revenue that subsidiary generates. Did you know the projected growth this year could exceed $25 million? The room froze. I looked up slowly, meeting their eyes, my smile calm and controlled. Robert's face turned pale. Clarissa's hand went to her mouth. The air shifted, thick with disbelief. Guests murmured, sensing tension. And I stood there, the picture of composed elegance, as the family realized their empire wasn't as untouchable as they thought. David was stunned. "Wait, how?" I shrugged delicately. "I guess sometimes you just notice things others overlook," I said, letting the words hang in the air. No yelling, no accusations, no drama, just quiet revelation. And in that quiet, the power shifted completely. The family, for the first time, saw me not as a naive fiancé, but as someone who understood their world and could navigate it with precision. Their arrogance had blinded them. Their threats had been meaningless. And their prenup, their weapon meant to control me, was irrelevant. I had stayed silent. I had observed. I had waited. And now, I held all the cards. The night ended with polite applause. But the real victory was silent, internal. They were frozen, realizing too late that their control had been an illusion all along. And I walked away, calm, collected, knowing that the quietest moves are often the deadliest, because sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's patient, calculated, and perfectly timed, and I had mastered it. The night of the family's formal board meeting arrived. Everyone assumed I was just another guest, David's fiancé, polite, calm, and uninvolved. But I had spent weeks preparing, quietly ensuring every piece of information, every financial detail, and every legal nuance was in place. Tonight, they would see just how underestimated I had been. As we gathered in the grand boardroom, Robert began speaking, detailing a minor acquisition he assumed would impress everyone. Clarissa interjected occasionally, sprinkling in pointed remarks about my understanding of finance, as if to remind me that I was still learning my place. I smiled politely, letting them perform. Every word, every glance, every subtle jab only reinforced their arrogance. Then, when the conversation shifted to the subsidiary I had discovered, I spoke. Calm, precise, unassuming. I've been reviewing the subsidiary's financials, I said, casually placing my folder on the table. The projected growth this year could yield over $25 million. And with the current management strategy, it could be significantly higher if restructured. Robert froze mid-sentence. Clarissa's hand flew to her mouth. Guests murmured, unsure what had just happened. And I continued, serene, confident. What's more, I added, there are several overlooked assets that, if integrated correctly, could increase net profits and reduce exposure to risk. I've drafted a report highlighting exactly how it could be done. I slid the folder across the table. Their eyes widened as they realized it was not a casual observation, it was a complete, meticulously prepared plan. The room was silent. Robert's face was pale. Clarissa's composure cracked ever so slightly. Even David looked stunned, admiration and disbelief flashing across his face. You prepared this? Robert stammered, unable to mask the shock. I reviewed the details you overlooked, I said, my tone gentle, almost conversational. It's just prudent to be thorough. After all, mistakes can be expensive. And there it was, the moment of truth. The prenup, their attempt to control me, meant nothing. I didn't need to sign it to claim what I had discovered. I didn't need confrontation to gain leverage. My silence, patience, and preparation had done more than any argument ever could. The realization hit them fully when I added one final point. With proper restructuring, I estimate the net benefit to the family exceeds $25 million. And all of it could be secured without any risk to current operations. The room went completely still. They were frozen, not just by the numbers, but by the fact that someone they had dismissed so casually, someone they assumed they could intimidate, had outmaneuvered them completely. David leaned toward me quietly. I had no idea you'd been doing all this. I smiled softly. Sometimes, the best moves are the ones they never see coming. And in that room, surrounded by the people who had tried to control me, belittle me, and intimidate me, I realized something powerful. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and lands precisely where it hurts the most. I had stayed quiet. I had observed. I had waited. And now, I was untouchable. The days following the boardroom revelation were surreal. David's family was still reeling, their pride bruised, and their arrogance shattered. The once commanding presence of Robert now seemed cautious, tentative. Clarissa, who had always been the queen of control, now spoke carefully, as if measuring every word before it left her lips, and I remained calm, collected, and utterly satisfied. David called me one evening, his voice a mix of admiration and awe. "I can't believe what you did." They didn't see it coming at all. I smiled quietly. They never do when you stay calm, observe, and plan. Their arrogance is always their weakness. Word spread quickly through the family's circle. I was no longer just David's fiancé. I was the one who had seen what they overlooked. The one who quietly turned the tables. The one who had ensured a $25 million advantage, all without raising my voice. Without arguing, without begging. Robert's initial shock gave way to a cautious respect, though I could see his ego struggling to accept it. Clarissa, meanwhile, remained polite but subdued, her usual domineering energy replaced by measured restraint. The family had been frozen, and even now, their recovery was slow. T. Home that evening as David and I sat quietly together. He reached for my hand. "You were incredible," he whispered. "I've never met anyone like you." I shrugged softly, trying to appear casual. "I just stayed patient, watched, waited for the right moment. That's all." But inside, I felt a surge of empowerment. Not just because of the money, not just because of the leverage I now held, but because I had done it on my terms. I had refused to be intimidated, refused to be controlled, and refused to compromise my self-worth. The family eventually accepted, outwardly, that I was now a force to be reckoned with. Their prenup, their threats, their subtle manipulations, they had all backfired. And the irony was delicious. They had thought their control was absolute. Yet it was their own arrogance that allowed me to claim the ultimate victory. I reflected on everything: the initial intimidation, the subtle tests, the relentless pressure, every insult, every condescending remark, every gift with strings attached. It had all been part of the puzzle. And now, the puzzle was complete, the most powerful part. They never saw me coming. Months had passed since that pivotal night in the boardroom, yet the memory of their stunned faces was still vivid in my mind. David's family had recovered in their own way, carefully, quietly, but they would never underestimate me again. And honestly, I didn't care if they did or not. My life, my future, my choices were now entirely mine. I had secured more than $25 million, not just in financial terms, but in personal power. The prenup, which had been their weapon, was irrelevant. Their threats, their manipulations, their condescension, they had all failed, and in their failure, I had triumphed. David and I continued our relationship, but now with a new dynamic. He wasn't the only one learning lessons. He had watched me navigate a world he had always taken for granted. And he had witnessed the strength of patience, observation, and quiet determination. The family, though outwardly polite, now approached me with a different respect. It wasn't love or warmth, it was acknowledgement. They recognized that I had outmaneuvered them, that I had won without ever raising my voice, and that I was not someone to underestimate. I often reflected on the lessons this journey had taught me. Patience is power. Reacting in anger or fear only plays into someone else's hands. Observation is strategy. The smallest details, the subtle clues, can reveal the greatest leverage. Silence is strength. Sometimes saying nothing communicates far more than any argument ever could. Self-worth is priceless. No document, no threat, no family expectation can dictate your value. And as I sat in my own apartment one quiet evening, looking out over the city lights, I realized something important. This victory wasn't just about money or leverage. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own identity, and my own voice. I had walked into their world quietly, respectfully, and without pretension. They had tried to intimidate me, to control me, to force me into a role I didn't accept. And now, I had walked away, or rather, stood firm, not with anger or confrontation, but with quiet, deliberate triumph. Sometimes the loudest victory isn't announced. It's lived, it's felt, it's undeniable, and mine was worth more than all the money in the world, because in the end, I had everything I truly wanted: respect, empowerment, and the knowledge that no one, not even the wealthiest, most controlling family, could ever take that away from me. I smiled softly, sipping my wine, knowing that patience, strategy, and self-belief had turned what was meant to intimidate me into the greatest triumph of my life, and they had frozen, exactly as I had imagined. All right, everyone, that's all I have for today. If you found this entertaining, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. If you want to watch more, please check out our playlist. Finally, a huge thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.